We are going to continue with our program. Next, I would like to introduce Jackie Wolcott, a former ambassador, and she's been in the State Department and diplomatic services for years and knows our speaker very well. So she will introduce him.
Can I pick some? Hi, everybody. Let's see. Ooh. I knew I wasn't going to get this right. I can just hold it. See if that works. Hello, everyone. Happy Valentine's Day. It's especially fun for me to be able to introduce one of my favorite people in Washington today as our keynote speaker. Can you hear? Okay. Elliott Abrams is one of the most consequential foreign policy experts of our time. And his topic today could hardly be more timely, relevant, and important. And that is Israel, Iran, Trump, and the new Middle East. As one of the youngest assistant secretaries of state ever to serve, Elliott did so not once, but in 3 separate assistant secretary positions during the entire 8 years of the Reagan administration. First, he had responsibility for international organization affairs, which is largely UN. And then he was in charge of human rights and humanitarian affairs. And then he was in charge of inter-American affairs, which is basically Central and South American affairs. For his outstanding work, then Secretary of State George Shultz presented him the Secretary's Distinguished Service Award in 1988. Elliott was Deputy National Security Advisor and Deputy Assistant to the President, and this was President George W. Bush, covering a wide range of issues: democracy, human rights, international organizations, the Near East, North African affairs, as well as global democracy strategy. And I think he told me you were there for the whole 8 years too, weren't you? Yes. So he's had a lot of years of service. President Trump, in his first term, named Elliott Special Representative for Venezuela, and then also Special Representative for Iran. And I had a chance to work with him in those issues. Elliott has been in leadership positions in several governmental and non-governmental organizations over decades, including President of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, Chairman and Commissioner of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, where I also got to work with him, member of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Council, the National Endowment for Democracy, and the Advisory Council of the Middle East Partnership for Peace Act. Currently, he's a member of the George W. Bush Institute Advisory Council, is on the board of the Jewish People Policy Institute, and is chairman of the Vandenberg Coalition and the Tikva Fund. He is also a senior fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations in DC. And I guess he probably still admits he's a graduate of Harvard College and Law School, as well as the London School of Economics. And he is the author of several books, including his recently published If You Will It, Rebuilding Jewish Peoplehood for the 21st Century. On a personal and happy note, after this luncheon ends today, Elliott will drive to Miami, where he will meet for the first time his new granddaughter, Evie, who was born just last week. And she is the 9th grandchild, I understand. So please join me in warmly welcoming the Honorable Elliott Abrams.
Okay, I'll start here. Thank you, Jackie, and thank you all for being here today. I am very glad to, see, I'm not going to read this. I just thought I'd scare you for a minute. It really is a great pleasure to be here. This is, maybe amazingly enough, my first visit to Naples. Pretty nice. I can see why you're here. I do want to talk about the Middle East. And I want to talk about what faces the president, because it's different from what faced him 8 years ago when he became president the first time. Different dangers, different opportunities. The greatest danger is easy to point to. Iran getting a nuclear weapon. And they're closer than they were 8 years ago. Greatest opportunities arise from what Israel's done in the last, 6 months to Hamas and to Hezbollah, and the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria. So there's lots of dangers, but I think the upsides for the president are greater than the downsides. And I think he's got to start, and this is going to be very easy for him, start by abandoning the idea that what we want in the Middle East is stability. Stability. We don't want stability. You know what we want? We want to win. We want our side to beat the bad guys. And we've had this policy of stability mostly for about 25 years. What was stable? That Gaza was under the control of Hamas, that Lebanon was under the control of Hezbollah, that Iran was moving slowly and steadily to a nuclear weapon. We're supposed to think, let's just continue that? No changes? No. That's a bad situation. We can change it, and it has begun to change. We've really got a chance here. First thing, as I mentioned, that Iran and this nuclear weapons program. I was hoping after the election that when the president became president again, he would pretty quickly say, Iran is never going to be permitted to have a nuclear weapon. And he did. Within about 2 weeks of becoming president again, he said it very flatly. And what he said was, look, they can't have a nuclear weapon. We will never let that happen. Now, there's 2 ways to do it. We can negotiate it or bombs away. And he said, if I can find the line, he said, I would much prefer a verified nuclear peace agreement. I think we all would. But he made it clear, if that's impossible, they had better know what's coming. Here's the danger. The Ayatollah Khamenei he's 85, and he's not in good health. And he may be thinking, Donald Trump's going to be president for 4 years, and I may not make it. So I had better rush to get a nuclear weapon so that my regime stays in power after me. That's the danger. And I think he knows now that if he shoots for that, they're never going to make it. They're not going to get to a nuclear weapon. So the president has given them a chance. He said, I would rather negotiate this. Let's see. It's going to start. Maybe it has already begun quietly, secretly. Maybe not. But it will start pretty soon. When I worked for the president, we had the maximum pressure campaign that he has just begun again. And we had a great time, I have to tell you. I mean, it sounds very kind of formal economic sanctions, but what we would do was actually call the head of an insurance company that insured ships and say, you insure one of those Iranian ships carrying Iranian oil, you will never do business in the United States again. We would call a ship captain and say, you carried that, you're the captain of that ship carrying Iranian oil, you will never be permitted to dock a ship in the United States again. And it worked. And by the time President Trump left office 4 years ago, they were close to being broke. Now, in the last 4 years, they have gotten back to having something like $60 billion in reachable foreign currency assets. But, pardon me, the purpose of the maximum pressure campaign was not war. It was to force them to negotiate a good deal, unlike the crummy deal that President Obama negotiated in 2015, which it was really, as President Trump has said, a very poor deal. So now we're going to try it again. The problem, people say to me all the time, well, you worked for Trump on Iran. His policy of maximum pressure failed. It's wrong. We did it for 2 years. By the end of the 2 years, they were near to broke. But then he left office. The idea that we had was he'd be reelected, and we would pass messages to the Iranians saying, 4 more years of this. You think you're in bad shape now? It's going to get worse and worse and worse unless you negotiate a real nuclear deal. You abandon the nuclear weapons program. So he's got 4 more years now. Policy did not fail, and he has put them on notice. Let's hope they come around, because if they don't, if they decide, no, we're going to rush to a nuclear weapon, they're not going to get there. Either we or the Israelis or some combination will stop them. And you know from last fall, last year, the Israelis knocked out their air defenses. These wonderful Russian, I'm okay, thanks. These wonderful Russian air defenses that were supposed to protect, boom, one day, gone. So we know they can be hit. One of the things that has to happen now, you know, Ambassador Wolcott was our ambassador in Vienna to the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. We need them to go back into Iran, which has been hiding lots of sites. That's something that we are going to have to demand. Why don't I trust Iran? I mean, they say we don't want a nuclear weapon. They have enriched uranium to 60%. No country has ever enriched uranium to 60% and not gone on to build a bomb. So this is not a case, to go back to President Reagan, of trust but verify. This is distrust, because we know who these people are. Now, you remember that President Trump achieved the Abraham Accords last time. That merited the Nobel Peace Prize. He didn't get it because he's Donald Trump. These are the people who gave it to Barack Obama for what? For nothing. I mean, they gave it to him in his first year in office. He had achieved nothing. Of course, he achieved nothing in 4 years, but I mean, he had achieved nothing. They gave it to him. I think we have another, or the president has another chance. I want to turn to Gaza because he's done something really remarkable. He announced his plan, which is the people in Gaza should leave. It's a demolition site, needs to be rebuilt. They can live in much better places. And you could hear the screams all around the world. It's an extraordinary thing. Think back now. Go back to, 1900, let's say. World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq. There has never been a war in which civilians were prohibited from leaving. Only Gaza. Only Gaza. In every one of these, there are refugees. I want to just give you some of the numbers because it's an extraordinary thing. No one has ever taken the position that, Arabs can't leave 6 million refugees from Syria. Remember, Germany took 1 million Syrians. Germany, one country, took 1 million Syrians. Iraqis, they were all over the place. Hundreds of thousands in Turkey, hundreds of thousands in Jordan. There are refugees all over the place. Nope, Gazans have to stay there. Why are they the exception? They're the exception because of this great ideological struggle against the state of Israel. They are basically cannon fodder. The idea is Israel's temporary, you see, and the Gazans have to stay there so they can, quote, go back home to Israel, which 95% of them have never set foot in, go back home. So they're not allowed to leave. Does not matter how much war there is, does not matter that they live in a demolition site. You get all these Arab foreign ministers saying, no, they have to stay where they are. It's inhumane. And the person who's called them on it is President Trump and said, wait a minute, these are people. What I would like for them, he said several times, let them live a normal life. They can't live a normal life in a demolition site. So people should help them. Arab country, Sinai's empty. Egypt could. You know how many Gaza refugees Egypt has taken? None. King of Jordan said he would take 2,000 kids. 2,000? Come on. So I congratulate the president for looking at this not as a way to attack Israel, not as politics, but for saying these are people and they deserve to have a life. They're going to have it someplace else. And then Gaza can be rebuilt. What he didn't say in that speech, or he's actually made a number of remarks now, he didn't use that old phrase, two-state solution, which I would have to say, and I have to claim, I've been saying it for about 20 years since the Bush administration, it is not going to happen. The Israelis left southern Lebanon, and who took over? Hezbollah. In 2005, they left Gaza. And who took over? Hamas. Now, they're in and out of the West Bank every day. If they leave the West Bank permanently, because no, now it's a Palestinian state, sovereign state, you can't go across the border, who's going to take over? I remember, because I was in the White House, 2005, when they left, I remember talking to the Egyptians. Aren't you worried about what's going to happen in Gaza? Hamas is pretty strong there. I remember talking to the head of intelligence, President Mubarak's head of intelligence. And he took the question as an insult and he banged on the table, literally banged on the table. Egypt has complete control. How can you doubt us? I have men in Gaza. If I need more, I'll send them. Took a year and a half after the Israelis left. And there was an uprising by Hamas. 1 week of warfare, 1 week. They knocked off the Palestinian Authority people and they took control of Gaza. So now you say to the Israelis, you need to get out of the West Bank. And who's going to come in? Palestinian Authority? That's a joke. I can remember one of the things I had to do in the Bush administration was help raise money for the Palestinians. And I remember talking to the foreign minister of Kuwait. And I said to him at the Arab League conference, you pledged whatever it was, $100 million, but you haven't paid any. So you should meet your pledge. And give you an idea of what the Arab governments think of the Palestinian Authority, he said to me, why should we give it to the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah? You and I both know where it's going. Why don't I send it right straight to the banks in Zurich? So they knew. That is why I think after what happened on October 7th, 2023, if you say to Israelis, left, right, and center, what you need to get out of Judea and Samaria. You need to have a Palestinian state, sovereign state in the West Bank. They'll look at you as if you're nuts. They really will. Now, I think if you go back to the Abraham Accords, you had Morocco, you had the United Arab Emirates, you had Bahrain. You didn't get the Saudis. And I think that is a real goal of the president's. Hard to achieve because the Saudis in the last year have talked a lot and very specifically about a Palestinian state. No sale in Israel. So can they compromise on some form of words? Maybe. Hard. But the Saudis, let's be candid here, they don't care all that much about the Palestinians. They care, of course, about Saudi Arabia. What the Saudis want is a defense relationship with the United States because they are very worried about Iran. And I don't know whether Congress is prepared to approve that. There is a spectrum, obviously. At one end would be a kind of NATO-like treaty. At the other end, a few speeches. Now, they want a treaty, which requires 67 votes in the US Senate. They want a defense treaty where we pledge to defend Saudi Arabia. My judgment, it's an estimate, is there aren't 67 votes for that in the US Senate. I think a defense agreement that calls them an ally, major non-NATO ally, yeah. Defense agreement that gives them access to sophisticated American weapons? I think so. But how far we're really willing to go, I think it's a tough question. It's going to be on the president's mind. He may be going to Saudi Arabia. That's one of the, was offered as a place where he might meet Putin in the next month or so. He'll have discussions with the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, about whether some kind of deal is possible. Put me down as skeptical. I think it would truly be a great thing, but I'm dubious that there's enough of an overlap here between what the Saudis want and the Senate is willing to offer, and what the Saudis want on the Palestinian issue, what they said they want, and what the Israelis are willing to offer. Now, there's one huge change, and I don't want to go on too long, so maybe this is the last point I'll make, and then we can do some Q&A. There's one huge difference between the way this is happening now and the way it was happening over the last 4 years. Isn't it striking to have a kind of live president? I mean, it's really, you go home, I go home, and I want to watch the evening news because you have to catch up with what has happened that day. And one of the things that happens is, it happened again yesterday. The president talked to the press for an hour. Now, just think back a year. The press was not allowed access to President Biden. First of all, he only worked essentially from 11 to 2. And the press, was kept away from him. It's really very striking, and I think we kind of got used to the idea that the president is kind of like the Wizard of Oz, right? Sort of behind the curtain. And you don't see him. People say he's there. And it's really kind of shocking to say, there's the president. You want to know what's going on. Turn on the TV. He's talking. He actually talks, It's a huge change. And it's a huge change also to know, people talk rightly about Elon Musk and Secretary of State Rubio and Mike Waltz from Florida. A lot of Floridians around now. Susie Wiles from Florida. But you know who is in charge. Nobody is asking, whether there's a cabal of people in the White House surrounding the president and keeping people away from him. We got kind of used to that. I actually, waiting to see the memoirs come out. I worked for Ronald Reagan, George Bush, Donald Trump, and in all those cases, you knew who was in charge. You will read a lot of what I'd call leftist garbage about President Reagan saying, oh, he was senile and he did what. It's all lies. You knew who was in charge and who was making the final decisions on everything. You knew it under Bush and you knew it and know it again now under Trump. When I lecture to foreigners, I did this last week to a group of Israeli Air Force officers, and they were asking, how is American foreign policy made? And I said to them, there are textbooks about this, but you don't need a textbook. It's very simple. It's not Congress. We don't have cabinet government. It's not the cabinet. It's the president. It's the president. There was a bit, I would say, of deviation from that under President Biden for reasons that are actually quite tragic, which is he was too old for the job. But we're back to normal now, and the president is making foreign policy. And I think already we've seen significant change in the Middle East in the last year or so, thanks to the Israelis, and now we're joining in. Because what the president has said about Gaza basically is, don't give me old ideas that have already failed. Let's try new ideas. And my answer when people say that Gaza idea, it's a crazy idea. My answer is, got a better one? I haven't heard one. So I'm quite optimistic about the chances for change in the Middle East. There are real dangers, primarily Iran, and there are real opportunities. And I think my prediction is that by the end of this 4 years, Donald Trump is going to get a Nobel Peace Prize. And it'll be different from Obama's because he'll deserve it. Thank you. Okay, how are we going to do this now?
Does anyone have questions? Raise your hand. There might be a microphone.
I want to say also, it's very nice to see that you allow a few men to be here today. Although, it's the Trump administration, so you don't have to do this affirmative action stuff anymore.
Well, just building on dangers and opportunities that you finished there with the Middle East, where does Syria fit in with that? And is that an opportunity? And I see Putin has just invited the new president to Moscow. And so how does this devolve in your view with Syria?
Yeah. Well, it is both a danger and an opportunity. It's been extraordinary to watch this guy, President al-Shara, who was, a terrorist dressed like one a few months ago, and now he's got a really nice wardrobe. I mean, I don't know whether you've seen, he's got very nice jackets, and he wears ties. I mean, if you want to send a signal, boy, I'm not a terrorist anymore, wear a tie. And he did that. I think we don't know yet. I think we don't know what direction he really wants to go in. There are some very positive signs, but we need to watch, for example, how does he treat the Kurds and other minorities, but particularly the Kurds? I understand why Putin invited him. The Russians have two bases, an air base and a naval base, Latakia, in Syria. their only base is in the Mediterranean, and they want to keep them. And we obviously don't want him to let them come back. They've kind of moved out of those bases to Libya. So I think al-Shara knows if he just stands up there in Moscow and says, come on back, that is going to severely prejudice his relationship with us. And the one thing he is never going to get from the Russians is money. Whereas it's not going to be our money, but working with the Saudis, Emiratis, Qataris, I think we hold part of the key for the money that he desperately needs. So real opportunity in Syria, if he is smart enough. I do hope the president doesn't, we've got about 2,000 guys in Western Iraq, Eastern Syria. I hope the president doesn't pull them out. He hasn't. Now, okay, it's only been a month, but he hasn't yet. And why do I say that? What they're doing there is helping contain thousands of Islamic State fighters. If we walk away, those guys can disperse and go back to the battle. So I think the investment of keeping 2,000 troops there is worth it. We're not taking any casualties there. So I hope the president will keep them there. So far, so good.
Yeah, Mr. Abrams. Yeah, you went over, we all know what President Trump wants to do now, and that is to clean up the Gaza. He wants to refurbish it totally, as he said, make it a beautiful city, et cetera, again. Key to that whole thing is moving the 2 million Palestinians temporarily out of Gaza so this can be done. This is going to take 8 to 10 years. My question, sir, to you is, and what puzzles me is, why won't the Arab neighbors take their own Arab people in?
Yeah.
Why? I would take my neighbor in.
You know, it's very striking because it's not that they've never done it. Jordan has taken hundreds of thousands of Syrians. So did Iraq at one point, and there's been an exchange of populations, and there's been a lot of movement. It's not that they never do it. It's that they never do it for Palestinians. And they never do it for Palestinians because they've got to stay there because of the unwillingness to accept Israel. This is the idea that Israel's temporary, and those people are going to go back into Israel. It's not going to be a Jewish state. They're going to go, quotes, home. And, you know, one of the things that President Trump has already done is to defund UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinians. Now, why? What's so bad about them? You know, what's a refugee? A refugee is somebody who goes from his home, her home, to someplace else, not their children and grandchildren. If you look at every refugee population in the world, the people who fled count as refugees. But what happens if you go someplace else, you get a permit to be there, you get citizenship there, you're not a refugee. Under the UN definition, somebody who left Israel, Palestine in 1948, came to America, had children born in America, had grandchildren born in America. The grandchildren are Palestinian refugees. It's nuts. So why do they do it? To keep alive the idea that they all have to go back to Israel and make sure it's not a Jewish state. It's ideological warfare against Israel. And the president is saying, well, we're not paying for that. So at some point, one has to hope the Arabs will abandon that struggle. Some of them have. Some of them have. But Jordan, Egypt, it is really unbelievable that in the face of what's happened to Gaza, they won't take anybody. It's indefensible.
Okay, we have a question here.
Finally, women are allowed to ask questions, you know.
Yes. I was going to ask about Erdogan, who seems to want to be reconstitute the Ottoman Empire and be the new caliph.
Yeah.
And then Qatar seems to be running higher education in America. That's a problem for our next generation of leaders.
Well, Turkey.
2 questions.
Yeah, Turkey, President Erdogan of Turkey, no friend of ours. I mean, Turkey's part of NATO, but they're not a great ally. He's an Islamist, and I think we just have to hope that they will have free elections, because he almost lost last time. And in fact, his party lost Istanbul, by far the largest city in Turkey. The mayor is from the opposition Conservative Party. So I worry a lot about Turkey and its influence, and I agree with you that he wants Turkey to be extremely influential in the whole region, including now he thinks he has an opportunity in Syria. And he does have an opportunity. So we've got to play that one carefully. He is a dangerous force in the Middle East. Now, the Qataris, I'm not a fan. They have more money than you can believe. I mean, I'll tell you a story. When President Bush went there, and I don't know, it was 2008, maybe 2007, they gave everybody a gift. The emir gave us all a gift. You can imagine what he gave the president, but that, the president doesn't take it. I mean, it goes to the National Archives. I was one of the people there, so I get a gift of what looked like a gold pen. And the way it works, you don't keep it. It goes to the gift office, and they auction it off. But you have first dibs. So if they say, that's a gold pen, it's $125, you can say, I'll pay it. I would like it as a souvenir of my trip. And so I put my chit in for that pen. And they called me and said, okay, you can have that pen. It's $1,500. And I said, what? $1,500 for a pen? Come on. And they said, Mr. Abram, you remember the pen? At the top of the clip part, where you clip it on your pocket, remember there was a kind of red stone? And I said, yeah. And he said, that's a ruby. That was for me. So you can imagine what everybody else got. Just untold amounts of money, and giving it to, it's all over the place, not only in universities, it's all over Washington. I said, $1,500? No, thank you. I proudly tell you today, sometimes I think I'm the only person in Washington not taking their money, because they've got dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of lobbyists. Lawyers, lobbyists, I mean, it's extraordinary. I would also say that if you look at what's going on our campuses in terms of the pro-Hamas demonstrations, I think a significant portion of the demonstrators are foreign students. And I am very much in support of the Trump administration view that if you're here in this country not to study but to demonstrate for a terrorist group, go home. So I worry a lot about their influence because they are supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood everywhere in the Middle East. And I think we are too kind. And I'll say one more thing about that. They have a TV station, Al Jazeera. During the Iraq War, Al Jazeera incited Iraqis to go kill American soldiers. They cost American lives. Now in the last year, they've been inciting people to support Hamas. And you will see opinion polls that say many, many Arabs don't know what happened on October 7th, 2023. They don't know about the brutality, killing babies, killing, I won't go on. Why don't they know? Al Jazeera won't broadcast it. So that's another thing I hold against them. Okay. This has to be a great question. It's the last one.
Well, pressure. Thank you very much for speaking to us. I went to Israel in June of 2023, and at the hotel I was at, the U.S. Embassy and the Palestinian Authority had a symposium, and then they had a dinner, and they were giving out our American flag with the Palestinian flag pins. And I've always had the Israeli flag with the American flag. And for our embassy in 2023 to copy that, I was highly insulted. I did bring some back from June. And then what happened in October?
Yeah.
Can you comment on it? Thank you.
Well, first, I have to say, use the word embassy. And that's right. Because today, the United States Embassy is in Jerusalem. And that is actually owed to President Trump. You're going to remember that. The embassy was in Tel Aviv from 1948 on. In fact, looking at some of the history of this, for several years after 1948, when the government of Israel was in Jerusalem, our embassy refused to go to meetings at the Israeli Foreign Ministry in Jerusalem. Wouldn't do it. Now we're there. This is the desire for peace, and we all share the desire for peace for Israelis, for Palestinians, for everyone else. But there is such a thing as tough love, and that is not an example of tough love. That's an example of what George W. Bush used to call the soft bigotry of low expectations, where people can get away with anything, where you don't make demands of them and hold them to standards of behavior. So I'm sure you didn't wear one of those pins. It's not a country. That's the other thing. I mean, I've seen those for many countries. The president of France comes, you get the French and American flags. British prime minister comes, you get the British and American flags. That is not a country, and there's no reason to wear those two flags together, I would argue, ever. So let me just end again by saying thank you for being here. It's great to be here in Naples. I will admit that I'm looking forward to leaving Naples because I want to go see my new granddaughter. But it's great to see what you're wearing today, which is, after all, Valentine's Day and MAGA colors. I mean, it worked out. Thank you.